You've been in those conversations that go sideways fast. You say something, they hear something else. Tensions rise, defenses go up, and suddenly it's not even about the topic anymore. It's about who's right. What if there were just a few simple truths about communication that could flip the entire script? Not tricks, not manipulation, real grounded truths that reframe the way we show up in every conversation. Let's get into 3 communication truths that will change every conversation you have, from the boardroom to your own home. Every conversation we have is far more than just an exchange of words. Beneath every sentence, underneath every tone, and behind every pause, there's something deeper happening. It's not just you talking to someone else, it's your nervous system interacting with theirs. Most people think communication is just about choosing the right words or saying the right thing at the right time. But the truth is, it's our physical, emotional, and psychological states that lead the way in any interaction. If you walk into a conversation already tense, anxious, or irritated, you are bringing that energy into the space before you've said a single word. The person on the other end may not consciously understand what's happening, but they can feel it. The atmosphere shifts, defensiveness rises, the conversation gets harder, more reactive, and suddenly the issue isn't even the issue anymore. It's about how it felt to be in that moment with you. We've all been in conversations where someone's words sounded fine, but the way they said them made our chest tighten. That's not because of what they said, but because of how their nervous system showed up. Their posture, their facial expressions, their tone. It told our body this isn't safe, this isn't calm, this isn't a moment to connect. And so our own nervous system goes into protection mode. We get louder, sharper, or maybe we shut down altogether. We stop listening and start defending. This is how conflict snowballs out of nothing. Not because someone said something wrong, but because the environment of the conversation was already charged. When you understand that every conversation is 2 nervous systems trying to figure each other out, everything changes. You stop reacting to what's said on the surface and start paying attention to the state behind the statement. You begin to ask, what energy am I bringing into this room right now? Am I tense? Am I rushing? Am I calm enough to hear and be heard? Regulating yourself isn't about being fake or pretending you're not upset. It's about recognizing that your inner state speaks first. When you're grounded, the conversation has a chance to stay grounded. When you're emotionally hijacked, the conversation will feel like a battlefield. Most people try to fix communication by focusing on strategy, what to say, how to say it, what phrases work best. But those are all secondary. The first and most powerful thing you can do is regulate your presence. Take a breath, slow down, loosen your shoulders, soften your face. When you walk into a conversation carrying calm, even difficult conversations become manageable. The other person doesn't have to brace themselves. They don't feel threatened. They're more likely to open up, to listen, to respond instead of react. And that's when real communication happens. That's when you move from confrontation to connection. It's not always easy, especially when emotions are high. But if you can hold steady while someone else is spiraling, you create space for safety. And safety is the foundation of every productive conversation. You don't need perfect words, you need a grounded presence. Because the nervous system of the person in front of you doesn't care about your logic. It cares about whether you feel safe, whether you feel tense, whether you feel open. And if you bring that awareness into every interaction, you start noticing that the conversation shifts, not because of a new script, but because of a new state. You become the calm in the storm, and that calm has more impact than any argument ever will. It's not about control, it's about regulation. And when you regulate yourself, you change the energy in the room. You set the tone, you lower the defenses, you lead not by force, but by steadiness. You begin to communicate not just with your words, but with your presence, and that presence shapes every moment that follows. Tone is the unspoken force that either opens doors in a conversation or shuts them before a single word lands. It's not just about what you say, it's how you say it that tells the other person what to feel, how to respond, and whether they can trust the moment they're in. You can have the perfect sentence planned out, you can have your facts in order, and you can be completely right on the issue. But if your tone is sharp, sarcastic, cold, dismissive, impatient, or angry, that's all they're going to hear. That tone becomes louder than your logic. It overshadows your message. It flips the emotional switch in the other person and sends the conversation down a completely different path than you intended. And the wild part is, most people are completely unaware of their tone because they're too focused on their words. But communication doesn't land in the ears, it lands in the body. People don't walk away remembering exact words. They walk away remembering how you made them feel in the moment. Your tone creates the emotional imprint. This is why someone can say something as simple as, "I'm fine," and it either calms the situation or escalates it. Same two words, same message. But a different tone tells an entirely different story. One version of "I'm fine" feels sincere and resolved. The other feels like a wall, like sarcasm, like a warning that something's about to go sideways. That tone isn't accidental. It comes from your internal state, from your emotional filter, from how you're managing or not managing your frustration or defensiveness. Tone exposes what your words try to hide. It cuts through surface-level politeness and shows the truth of how you feel. That's why people get confused or triggered in conversations where the words seem okay, but the tone doesn't match. The brain catches that disconnect and flags it as a threat or dishonesty. And now the other person isn't responding to your message, they're responding to your emotional energy. It shifts from conversation to confrontation without anyone fully understanding why. To shift this, you have to take ownership of how you sound, not just what you say, but how it's being received. Ask yourself, would I feel safe if someone used this tone with me? Would I feel respected? Would I feel seen? If the answer's no, then that's a signal to adjust. Lower your voice, soften your delivery, use pauses, drop the edge. This doesn't mean you have to sugarcoat truth or walk on eggshells. It means aligning your tone with your intention. If your goal is connection, your tone has to feel like an invitation, not a confrontation. If your goal is resolution, your tone has to reflect that you're willing to listen and not just push your point. The more control you have over your tone, the more control you have over the outcome of the conversation. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do when things feel tense is pause and reset your tone before you continue. Because once the wrong tone has been used, even the best apology struggles to undo the emotional reaction it created. That's how deep tone cuts. It bypasses intellect and hits the nervous system straight on. It's not enough to say the right thing. You have to sound like you mean it. You have to feel like you're in control of your own emotional volume. Because in heated moments, the tone becomes the message. And when you learn to master that tone, when you learn to notice it, soften it, redirect it, you give your conversations a completely different direction. You stop triggering the other person's defenses and start creating space for understanding. That space is where connection grows. And it grows not from being perfect with your words, but from being intentional with your presence. Tone is not just a delivery tool, it's a decision. It's the difference between conflict and clarity, between friction and flow, between someone shutting down and someone opening up. When tone becomes your responsibility, the entire conversation shifts. Clarity is not just a communication skill, it's an act of respect. When you're clear in what you mean, what you feel, what you expect, and what you're asking for, you remove the confusion that often causes the most unnecessary tension in conversations. So many misunderstandings don't come from bad intentions, they come from vague communication. You assume the other person should already know what you mean, what you're thinking, or what you expect, and when they don't respond the way you wanted, frustration builds. That frustration doesn't stay inside. It leaks out in your tone, your posture, your energy, and then the conversation turns sideways, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. People aren't mind readers. They can't decode hints or guess how you're really feeling based on subtle cues. And yet, people do this all the time. They want something but don't say it directly. They're hurt, but try to play it cool. They need help, but don't ask clearly. They're setting a boundary, but do it in a roundabout way. All of it creates room for interpretation, and that interpretation is rarely accurate. Vagueness is where assumptions live, and assumptions almost always turn into resentment. You resent them for not getting it. They resent you for suddenly getting upset over something they didn't even realize was a problem. That resentment compounds over time until one small moment becomes an emotional tipping point. That's when someone finally snaps or shuts down, and the other person is left confused and blindsided. Clarity prevents that buildup. It draws a straight line instead of leaving emotional breadcrumbs. It creates mutual understanding instead of unspoken expectations. And even though it might feel a little uncomfortable to be that direct, especially if you're not used to it, it is actually the kindest thing you can do in communication. Being clear doesn't mean being harsh. It doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being honest with intention. When you say what you actually mean, you give the other person a real opportunity to meet you there. And if they don't, now you have something solid to work from instead of trying to navigate the fog of miscommunication. Clarity is how you protect your peace. It's how you avoid unnecessary arguments, how you prevent emotional spirals, and how you build trust. Because when people know that you'll say what you mean without games or guilt trips, they feel safer around you. They know where they stand. They don't have to constantly read between the lines or walk on eggshells trying to figure out what's really going on. That safety is what makes deeper conversations possible. It creates space for honesty, for vulnerability, and for solutions. It allows you to work through conflict without it turning into chaos. But clarity starts with you. You can't expect to communicate clearly with others if you're unclear with yourself. That means slowing down and checking in. What am I really feeling right now? What do I actually need in this moment? What boundary am I trying to draw? What truth am I afraid to say out loud? Once you get clear on that, then you can communicate it without confusion. You can say it with confidence. You can say it without hiding behind frustration or sarcasm or emotional silence. Clear communication is a choice. It's not always the easiest one, especially in the heat of the moment, but it's the one that creates the most peace on the other side. And it's not about being perfect with your delivery. It's about being intentional with your message. It's about giving someone the map instead of getting mad that they're lost. The more clarity you bring to your conversations, the less drama you invite. You can still be kind and be clear. You can still be firm and be respectful. You can still care about the other person and care about your own boundaries at the same time. It's not about choosing one over the other. It's about showing up with a communication style that builds trust instead of tension, that solves problems instead of spinning in circles, and that leads to understanding instead of assuming. Clarity builds bridges where vagueness builds walls. Listening is one of the most underestimated skills in communication because most people think they're already doing it. But in reality, a lot of what gets labeled as listening is really just waiting for your turn to talk. It's rehearsing your comeback, planning your defense, or quietly judging the other person's words while they're still speaking. That's not listening, that's loading your next move. And when you do that, you're not creating space for the other person. You're filling it with your own internal noise. Real listening is about presence. It's about letting the other person exist fully in that moment without interrupting, correcting, or controlling the conversation. It's about setting your ego to the side long enough to hear what's actually being said, not just what you're afraid of hearing or what you want to argue against. When someone feels truly heard, something shifts. Their nervous system relaxes. Their guard comes down. The tension in their voice softens. You can see it in their body language. You can feel it in the way they start to open up. That shift doesn't happen because you agreed with them. It happens because you gave them space to exist. Most people are carrying so much emotional weight from never feeling heard, never feeling seen, that when someone finally shows up and just listens, really listens, it creates an impact that goes beyond words. But that kind of listening takes discipline. It takes awareness. It takes the ability to quiet your mind to resist the urge to correct the story, to let someone finish their sentence even if you strongly disagree. You don't have to agree to understand. You don't have to like what you're hearing to acknowledge it. Listening is not surrender. It's not weakness. It's strength. It's maturity. It's the willingness to connect before you correct. The truth is, most people aren't looking for advice. They're not even looking for answers. They're looking for connection. They want to feel like their emotions are valid, like their experiences matter, like their voice isn't being drowned out by someone trying to win the conversation. And when you listen deeply without jumping in, you give them that gift. You allow the conversation to move from reaction to reflection. You model the kind of behavior that encourages real dialogue instead of emotional warfare. It doesn't mean you never speak up. It doesn't mean you let people talk over you or avoid conflict. It means you choose the timing of your words more wisely. You listen not just to reply, but to understand the landscape of where the other person is coming from so that when you do speak, it's with clarity, intention, and respect. Listening isn't passive. It's active. It's leaning in, not zoning out. It's picking up on what's being said and what's not being said. It's noticing the pause between words, the tremble in the voice, the shift in eye contact, the deeper story that's hiding beneath the surface. It's asking yourself, what does this person need right now? Do they need a solution, or do they just need to be heard? Do they want feedback, or do they need space to process? When you listen like that, with care, with presence, with patience, you're not just hearing, you're honoring. And that kind of listening is what builds trust. It tells the other person, you matter enough for me to put my agenda on hold. You matter enough for me to hear you all the way through. You matter enough for me to hold space without needing to fill it with my own opinions. This is what most conversations are missing. Not louder voices, but quieter minds. Not stronger arguments, but deeper presence. The kind of presence that says, I see you. I hear you, and I'm not just waiting to prove you wrong. And it's not just about helping the other person feel safe. It's also about helping yourself stay grounded. Because when you truly listen, you slow down the pace of the conversation. You remove the rush. You hear the real issue beneath the noise. And in that slower, quieter space, there's room for resolution, for connection, and for mutual respect. Listening is not a passive act. It's one of the most powerful tools in communication because it builds a foundation that words alone can't create. Setting a boundary isn't about building a wall or starting a fight. It's about creating clarity and preserving respect. A lot of people think boundaries have to sound harsh or aggressive to be taken seriously, but the truth is, boundaries that come from calm are far more powerful than those delivered in anger. You don't have to yell to be firm, and you don't have to be cold to be clear. When you approach boundaries with emotional steadiness, you communicate not just the limit, but the intention behind it. You're saying, I value this relationship enough to be honest about what works for me and what doesn't. You're not punishing the other person. You're protecting your peace. And that protection matters because without boundaries, you start to shrink in your own life. You start to tolerate behavior that exhausts you, words that hurt you, patterns that drain you. You go silent to keep the peace, but inside, you're building resentment. And resentment always leaks out eventually. It shows up in your tone, your energy, your patience, and your willingness to show up fully in the relationship. Setting a boundary is how you stop that cycle before it begins. A boundary isn't about controlling someone else's behavior, it's about taking responsibility for how you respond to it. You can't make someone respect your time, your values, your energy, but you can choose what you allow into your space. You can decide how much access someone gets. You can decide where the line is. That's not selfish, that's self-awareness. And when you communicate that line with calm confidence instead of chaos, it creates a different kind of conversation. You're not blaming, you're not attacking. You're simply stating what's okay and what's not, and you're doing it without emotional spikes. That calm delivery makes it easier for the other person to hear you instead of getting defensive. It gives the conversation room to breathe, and it gives the relationship a chance to adjust rather than explode. But here's where a lot of people struggle. They wait too long to set the boundary. They let things pile up. They hope the other person will just figure it out. They keep tolerating little things that feel like paper cuts until suddenly they're bleeding from 1,000 of them. Then, when they finally speak up, it comes out as anger instead of clarity. It sounds like an attack instead of a conversation. That's why boundaries have to be practiced early and often. Not when you've reached your breaking point, but when you first feel that inner discomfort. That feeling is the signal. And the earlier you respond to it, the easier the conversation is. You don't have to wait for someone to cross a major line to express how something impacts you. And the more you do this with calm repetition, the more natural it becomes. It stops being a big, dramatic thing and starts becoming a regular part of how you communicate. Boundaries also help you show up more fully for the people you care about, because when you're constantly overextending, overgiving, or overexplaining, you don't have much left for authentic connection. You're running on resentment instead of presence. But when you've protected your time, your energy, and your emotional bandwidth, you have space to listen, to engage, to enjoy the relationship instead of surviving it. That's what a healthy boundary does. It preserves your capacity to stay kind, to stay generous, and to stay honest. And yes, some people might push back when you set a boundary, especially if they've benefited from you not having one. But their reaction doesn't make your boundary wrong. Their discomfort doesn't mean you're being unfair. It just means the dynamic is shifting, and not everyone welcomes change with open arms. That's why your tone and your consistency matter. The way you hold your boundary teaches people how serious you are, not through threats, but through follow-through, through calm repetition, through not backing down the second someone disagrees. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow, by what you reinforce, and by what you consistently communicate. Boundaries aren't just a defense, they're a direction. They tell people how to love you, how to work with you, how to stay connected to you in a way that honors both sides. They're not a rejection, they're a request for healthier connection. And the more you practice them with calm clarity, the more your relationships begin to reflect the respect you have for yourself.